All right. So the number one, we are the very first one in the series, Trusting the Process. I'm not sure how many weeks this is go. It feels to me like about 5 or 6. But part of what's going on is that I'm trusting the process and I'm just allowing God to let it unfold the way it is. I will be talking a bit today about this new way of doing church that I'm doing because it is very, very different from me. I am one that likes to be over prepared with 49 more pages than I'll ever use. And I have had some advice and I have prayed a lot and written a lot, and I've decided that I am doing it this new kind of way where I am getting some research so that I have backup for what I want to be saying, but I am doing a lot more of my own talking. It is much more I was going to say frightening. It is much more, takes a lot more trust because I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. I don't have the words written out. I have bullet points, but I am trusting that this is what God wants me to do and that God wants me to know that He will put all the words in my mouth and then I will say what needs to be said, and that hopefully it will all be helpful for you. So we're going to talk first. The talk that I'm pulling from is called When God Talks Back. It's by Tanya Lerman. She is a psychological anthropologist, and so we're going to hear from her. So this is the first in the series because I understand that you have to be able to hear God's voice in order to trust in the process. You can't trust in the process unless you are really, really very submerged in the belief that it's going to be okay, that God's got your back, and that God will give you answers. And so we're going to be talking a lot in the whole series about trusting the process, but we needed to start with hearing God's voice so we could know that God is here with us. So we're going to be talking about trusting the process when there is a need for change, when there is a challenge in a relationship. We will be talking about trusting the process when there are financial insecurities. We will be trusting the process when there are medical challenges. We will be trusting that I am enough and that I have enough. We'll be trusting that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we will trust when something is not right, when it just does not feel right. We're going to trust our instincts if it tells us not to do something anymore because it just doesn't feel right. So we're going to be talking about that. So instinct, trusting your instinct, that is trusting God. We will talk a little bit about letting go when hanging on is not working anymore. So our scriptural references will be to hearing God's voice. There is a Presbyterian minister who is an incredible theologian, has written many, many books. You probably all heard of Dallas Willard. I absolutely love Dallas Willard. So we will be talking about his book, Hearing God. And then we'll be talking about Here's What I Know. So we're going to start off with When God Talks Back by Tanya Lerman. She is what's called a psychological anthropologist. She works at Stanford University. She is author of several books. One is How God Becomes Real. Though she actually has a book called When God Talks Back. She has a book called Of Two Minds, An Anthropologist Looks at American Psychiatry, which is also very, very revealing. So she says that a new remarkable phenomenon is taking place where people not only talk to God, but they learn to experience God as talking back. She calls it renewalist spirituality. I've never heard it called that before, but evidently there are churches that call themselves renewalist churches, and they focus on spirituality, the experience of God intimately, personally, and interactively. They want to be able to touch the divine here on earth. So, as an anthropologist, what she does, her hero was Margaret Mead, and what she does is submerge herself in the culture of whatever it is she's studying so that she can understand how it works. So she spent 2 years in a renewalist church in Chicago, and then she spent another 2 years in a renewalist church in the Bay Area. She went to Sunday services. She was a member of the house group. She was in a prayer circle, and she totally immersed herself in the communities. She said she always has believed, and they teach quite a bit, that God is mighty and holy and beyond, but it also is a person among people. They want to experience God as the early disciples experienced Jesus. They walked with him, they ate with him, they talked with Jesus. He was their friend. They want to teach you that you should put out a cup of coffee for God. You should have a beer with God. You should go for a walk and hang out with God and get to know him as a person. He says he cares about all of the stuff in your life, the little stuff, where you go on vacation, what shirt you're going to wear tomorrow. You can talk to him about all of that. And so these churches, these renewalist churches, are all about forming a personal relationship with God. And as you know, I'm all about that too. So it fits in with a lot that I've already spoken with you about. He cares about all of the little stuff. People learned how to have this new relationship with him. They come to churches. She said, as she spent years and years doing her studying, she understood that some people come to the churches saying, God doesn't talk to me. And they were specifically coming to these churches because they felt like they couldn't hear God's voice or they couldn't talk to God's voice. And then after a couple of years or months or some substantial amount of time, they said, I recognize God's voice the way I recognize my mom's voice on the telephone, which I thought was just great. So the church teaches us to think of the mind not as a fortress that is filled with our own self-generated thoughts and feelings, but as images that are a place where you are going to meet God, and the thoughts that you have are of coming from him. God's thoughts are being given to you. Your job is to figure out who was God, and that the images that you have in your mind are not actually all self-generated. A lot of them are generated from God. So they talked as though they had experiences that weren't their own. One woman said, I feel like my mind is a screen that the images are being projected on, and somebody else is controlling the clicker. I just love that. Not all thoughts come from God, and we do have to be very, very careful about which ones do and which ones don't. The ones that came from God are thoughts that stood out. They were more spontaneous. They were louder. The same thought may have come back to you repeatedly over a period of time, and they captured your attention. And so people were praying over the congregant. There was this one woman who had this experience. People were praying over the congregant, and she was part of a prayer circle, and she got the words, go to Kansas. So it turns out that her parents lived in Kansas, but she wasn't really planning on going there. And she kind of asked the idea, where did that come from? But she ended up listening to that voice, and she did go to Kansas. So discerning God's voice, she said, the woman who wrote this book said that people were very thoughtful about the process. Church takes care to minimize the risks that are involved. God tells you to relax and calm down, the pastor said, that's totally fine. If God tells you to quit your job, pack your bags, and move to LA, the pastor said, I want you to pray with every member of your house group. I want you to pray with your prayer circle, and I want you to pray with me, him, the pastor. He said, together, this community will help you to discern whether that's actually God or just some of your own stuff that's getting in the way. So what are people doing when they're praying like this? They're using their imagination to do something they do not regard as imaginary. If you are going to think about God, you've got to use your imagination because God is invisible. Using your senses, your imagination, as part of the tradition of Christian spirituality has been around for many, many, many years. The medieval monastics cultivated the inner senses to make God more alive and present to them, and that's what these Christians are doing also. So we're not just talking to the God in their mind. They are imagining what God might say. They are imagining sitting on God's lap or sitting on a park bench and feeling God's arms around their shoulders. They are imagining lighting a candle. And in their mind, they're trying to smell the scent as they continue to feel it going up to heaven. So she says, my work demonstrates that this cultivation of inner senses is a skill. It gets better over time. It changes you. People say their mental imagery gets sharper. The things that they imagine become more real. God's voice will pop out into the world. You will hear it with your own ears. One woman said the more she prayed, the images became more vivid for her. She said, it's almost like a PowerPoint presentation. She gave an example of God's voice. She said, one morning she had had a very powerful prayer session, a devotional session with God, and she came out into Chicago. It was freezing, and she was absolutely sure that the fact that she had had such a wonderful devotional was why the bus came so quickly, and God was hearing her and knowing she didn't want to be cold. And so she was very grateful that God brought the bus so quickly. She got on the bus and she was submerged in the book, and she actually heard the voice, "Get off the bus." And she realized she was going to miss her stop. And she said she felt wonderful that God was so intimately involved with her in her daily life, that he actually showed up in her brain and told her to get off the bus. So these voices and visions are less unusual than you think. So depending on the way that you ask the question, between 10% and 70% of the population will say that they had some of these experiences. They're not crazy. So as an anthropologist and a psychologist, he says there's a different structure and pattern of the thought than anything that meets the criteria for schizophrenia. So a lot of people say there's something mentally wrong with you if you're seeing this and hearing this. And she's saying, no, there are special criteria for schizophrenia, and this is not like that at all. This is not like that. So people think it's rare, but it's actually common that people have them, but the instances themselves are rare. So you don't have them every day. You have them every once in a while. You have one or two or a handful. They are brief, they are positive. So one woman was in distress about something that was really bothering her, and she was driving, and she said she is absolutely sure that God spoke to her from the back seat and said, "I will always be with you." And she drove onto the side of the road and started crying hysterically because she believed that it was true, and she felt safe and secure, and she was overwhelmed with that. So the experiences are powerful. They respond to training. The more people practice the inner sense cultivation, the more likely they are to have one or more, and the more likely they are to say that the experiences are more powerful. So they did an experiment. Obviously, she's a psychologist and anthropologist. They studied 100 people. And so she split them in half randomly. There was one half that had to study lectures on the gospel, and then there was one half that had to study what they call inner sense rich prayer. They had to do 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week for 4 weeks. And then they were brought back in and they were given computer experiments and also questionnaires to fill out. And the folks in the prayer group had sharper mental images, more of a sense of God's presence, and more of a sense of God as a person. They had more unusual spiritual experiences, and they were more open to voices and visions. So they've also found out that some people are more able to do this. There are some people that it's like a talent, that they just have more talent in able to do this, independent amount of the time that they spend praying. Some just are more what she would call gifted than others. She asked them whether they feel comfortable being absorbed in their imagination, and they are more likely to experience God as a person. They have a continual back and forth relationship, one or more times that they have had voices and visions of God. So don't think as an anthropologist that she can answer all these questions about God. She says she doesn't think that those are questions that any person, psychologist, anthropologist, anybody can answer, that she can give you statistics on how the experiments went, but these are intimate questions that you have to be able to answer yourself for God. So she said the questions about hearing the sense of God, everybody has to come to their own conclusion on. The Christians have a way of asking this question, and they say, if God is always speaking, how come not everybody hears? So as people are entering the churches like this, they begin to pay attention to their mind. They have new ways to pay attention to that inner sense, and they really do have different experiences that they associate with the presence of God. Churches offer an invitation to pay attention in different ways. Individuals have psychological response to the way they are trained and the way that they train their attention. We learn that belief is not a thing, that people who believe have a special thing in their life. A lot of people think that if you have the ability to believe and see all this, you have something special. She said, we don't believe that at all based on our studies. We've learned that the experience of God is made slowly when you pay attention to your world, to your history of hearing God, talking with God, and feeling more confident that God is there. I think the practices make God more real to people. She also explains why the practices are so appealing in this kind of society. Since the 1960s, Christian mainstream churches, the membership, as you know, has been plummeting. Churches like these that encourage an inner sensing and communing with God are exploding. They make God more relevant, trying to hear God speak. They shift from a 45-minute sermon on a Sunday to something you are doing throughout the week. The practices make God more real, more alive. Churches which put the emphasis on the practices emphasize the experience of God and God's mystery. It helps somebody hang on to their sense of God. I think we learn something about our minds, she says. The way we pay attention to our mind changes our mental experience. It is tempting to think the landscape of our inner experience is set, whether or not we believe in God, but making choices about the way you use your imagination and your inner senses and the choices that you make will change you. So that's some work. I will put a link in the description that I send out so that you can find all of her notes. So we're going to talk about scriptural references to hearing God's voice. We'll start with John 10:25. Jesus answered, I tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Jeremiah 33:3, call to me and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and hidden things that you have not known. Psalm 85:8, let me hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace to his people, to his saints, but let them not turn back to folly. Psalm 119:105, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Romans 10:17, faith comes from hearing the message. Hebrews 4:12, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of your heart. Revelations 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and be with him. Exodus 33:11, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Okay, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Dallas Willard. Dallas Willard is a brilliant theologian, Presbyterian minister, a professor at seminary. He wrote the books, The Allure of Gentleness, among others, The Divine Conspiracy, Rediscovering Our Hidden Life in God, The Great Omission, Reclaiming Jesus' Essential Teachings on Discipleship, Hearing God, Developing a Conversational Relationship with God. And so I pulled some of the quotes from the book, Hearing God. And first one is, the human system simply will not function properly without hearing God. God has created us for intimate friendship with himself, both now and forever. Hearing God is but one dimension of a richly interactive relationship, and obtaining guidance is but one facet of hearing God. It is through the action of the word of God upon us, throughout us, and with us, that we come to have the mind of Christ, and thus to live fully in the kingdom of God. And the still small voice, or the interior or inner voice, as it is also called, is the preferred and most valuable form of individualized communication for God's purposes. God usually addresses individually those who walk with him in a mature, personal relationship, using this inner voice, proclaiming and showing forth the reality of the kingdom of God as they go. All right, here's what I know. So I'm going to give you some examples. Some of you may know some of them. I don't think all of you know all of them. And then I'll talk a little bit about this new process that I'm in. So many powerful examples during my life, starting with this most recent decision, the decision to do church differently. So I was talking about it a little bit before I came on. And so I, after 4 years, have thought that the way that I was doing church wasn't working for me. I know that a lot of you really, really love all of the research and that you love all of the feeling that it's a class, but I was feeling like I wasn't doing what I believe to be is my job, which was spiritually uplifting through my voice. So I felt like I wasn't giving you me personally. And I felt like I was holding back because I was afraid. And I didn't want to take the chance, because when I do a lot of research, I'm saying everybody else's words. But I kept getting this message. The research is good and it's helpful and it gives you a backdrop, but you're supposed to be saying your words. That's what God kept saying to me. I put you here to say your words. They can do the research and get their own words, but you need to start allowing me to speak through you by making these services more personal. Now, I will say I am doing a little bit less research and a lot more trusting. Since the very first day, as you all know, I've said to you many times, before I get on the camera, I get on my knees and I say, okay, God, thank you for giving me the words. And I 100% believe that God is going to give me the words. But I have so much backup information that I often don't give you a lot of my words. I give you everybody else's word. So I've decided to do I'm not actually doing less research, but I'm providing to you less research and I'm being more trusting. It is a loss of control when I do the here's what I know part because I'm not always sure what's going to come out of my mouth. But I trust that I'm supposed to be doing this. I trust God will put the words in my mouth, and I'm trusting so much more than I ever did before. So the whole process of building Lost Inside ministry was came from the thought in my brain that I, as you know, had been an addiction counselor for many more decades, and I thought I could be more helpful to people if I talk about God more. And so I went back to school and I got a degree in pastoral ministry. And then I went to seminary and I got ordained. I felt like I needed to go back to school to get a degree in pastoral ministry because I wanted to be really solid in my biblical understanding and in my Christian walk. So I did do that. And I remember I got my degree, and one of my very good friends said to me, so how are you going to make money? And I was like, I don't know. I'll do some weddings, I'll do some funerals. I don't know. I really don't know. And she was very angry with me that I actually incorporated, as you know, this is incorporated Lost Inside Ministries and LLC. And I had a lawyer write up all the papers and all that. And she was pretty upset with me that I had gone to all this financial um, process when I had no way of making the money back. And I just kept saying, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. And I really genuinely didn't know. I just thought, okay, I can do workshops. I've always been good at doing workshops. And so I thought I'll hook up with some churches and I'll do some workshops. But I really genuinely didn't know. And so the whole process of building Lost Inside was me saying, I'll take it one day at a time and do what I'm supposed to do, and God will tell me what I'm supposed to do, and I'll just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And so that's how that all happened. And then I found Blaine, and Blaine and I were really, really, really close, really close. I loved Blaine with my whole heart. And Blaine started asking me to do some sermons at the CCNT, and the rest is history, as you all know. And I absolutely 100% believe that God set that all up because I was so close to Blaine. When Blaine passed, it was kind of normal for me to take over and do that. Mimi and I were also close at the beginning, and so I think God put all those pieces in place. So I'm going to go back now chronologically because there's, as you know, I've been talking to God since I'm 9 years old. So maybe some of you don't know, but at 9 years old, I felt the need to talk to God and ask for help. And my parents were divorced. My dad left when I was 6, and I was scared and vulnerable, and something had happened in New York City that frightened me very badly. And so I started getting on my knees. So at 9 years old, I started saying, okay, God, I trust you. You're going to help me. And I need for you to be here with me. And I need for you to tell me what to do. And I swear to you, I said these words before, but I'm not kidding. He was my best friend. I didn't have a best friend. He was my best friend. I talked to him all the time, every day. I went into the bathroom and closed the door if I was afraid anybody would see me or hear me. But mostly I just talked to him all day long and said, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? How can I get through this? What should I do? And so that started when I was 9 years old. Some examples of hearing God's voice were in my late 20s. I was working in marketing. I was making good money, really good money. And I was working in marketing. And I remember I was still, I was an active alcoholic. And I remember walking by a bar, and I swear it came out of nowhere. Oh, you're going to treat ACOAs. So adult children of alcoholics. You're going to go back to school and you're going to treat ACOAs. And I was like, where did that come from? It really came out of nowhere. I was not sober. I was not in recovery, nothing. I was still very much drinking. And I got that voice that said, you're going to change your life around and you're going to start treating ACOAs. Well, as you all know, I did go back to school, and I went to New School for Social Research in New York City. I became a licensed substance abuse counselor, and I did that for many, many, many years. I was a program coordinator for an outpatient program. I worked in inpatient, I worked in detox, I worked in rehab, I worked in emergency rooms. And so that I swear to God, that came out of nowhere, nowhere. I wasn't expecting it, I wasn't planning it, but that's what happened. In terms of hearing his voice, I think many of you have heard my story about the IRS. So while I was not taking care of myself or business or doing anything I was supposed to be doing, I didn't pay my IRS bills for a while. And I started getting all these letters saying, you have to pay and you have to go to court and all. I didn't tell anybody because I was scared to death. And but I finally got my crap together, and I was on my way to court. I was driving to court, and I had the same experience of this other woman. Except in my case, God was sitting right next to me. I was in the driver's seat driving, and he was sitting right next to me. And it was the same experience. He said, I will never leave you. You're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. You're going to owe a lot of money. You're going to pay a lot of money. It's going to take you years to get back on track, but I will never leave you. I will never leave you. And I swear to God, he was sitting right next to me in the passenger seat. Some other experiences of hearing God's voice were when my mother passed. She passed quite suddenly, literally in a week's time. I put her into the hospital thinking that she had pneumonia. Turned out that she had lung cancer, and she was very, very sick. And within a week, she was dead. And I did not have my crap together at all. And I knew that I was her executor. I knew that. And I knew that I had to start paying bills. She had an apartment that I had to pay a mortgage on. She had a house in Dallas I had to pay a mortgage on. I knew I had to take care of everything, but I was losing it. And my sister flew into town to help me clean out her apartment. And I knew that I had to find the will. The will was the first thing that was going to say that I was the executor and everything else. And I was not doing well at all. And I couldn't find the will. And I knew that without the will, I wasn't going to be able to do anything. And a light started flickering on a desk. Right next to the desk was a door with a handle. On the handle was a carpet bag. And in the carpet bag was her will. If that light had not started flickering, she must have known she was going to die. I'm guessing she was much sicker than I thought she was. I found the will. It was the only thing in that bag. It was one of those big tote bags that looked like a carpet bag, sort of. And that was the only thing in the bag, was the will. And the light started flickering, and I didn't really pay attention, but my sister said, the light's flickering, something's happening, something's happening. And sure enough, on that doorknob was the bag, and that was the will. The move to AZ. So you all know about the crazy move to AZ. I had never been to Arizona in my whole entire life. And I flew here because my neighbor's mother was a realtor here and said, oh, you're just going to love Scottsdale. Come to Scottsdale and I'll show you all around. And she came here, and swear to God, I knew the minute I landed, this was it, that this is where I needed to live. Absolutely knew within a month. I had rented an apartment here. I flew back in a couple of days. I gave notice at my job. I, within a month, had rented an apartment here. I sold my house, as you know, and I came here. The job that I had was, I was in sales. I was a national sales rep for a legal firm. And I went to give in my resignation. He said, oh, no, keep your job and work from Arizona. I'm like, you're kidding, right? And he's like, no, just keep your job and work from Arizona. That's all God. That's all God. That's all God. So I did that. I kept my job. I worked from Arizona while I went back to school and while I got my degree. And that's all God. Um, Now I want to talk just a little bit about the just doesn't feel quite right part I made an allusion to before. So this INTA thing that we had, I'm going to be very careful about how I word this, but I think some of you would agree that it just didn't feel good anymore. And everything inside of me felt like this isn't home. And I didn't feel Blaine there anymore. I felt disrespected. Um, I didn't tell you all of the details, and I won't go through all of the details, but it was dirty. I was getting there really early and mopping floors and cleaning up a really bad situation. And so I kept getting the message, if something doesn't feel right, it's time to go. And everything inside of me said, it's time to go. And as you know, I looked for a place and I didn't find a place, and we decided to do it on Zoom. But I was very, very intentional about, as I've said to you before, seeing you all live every 90 days. That's on the calendar. And as I've told you all, I'm very excited about our Christmas plans. I do have a really beautiful Christmas place that I'm going to have all set up for us to have a huge big party. And that was just the luck of God. I was just looking for event spaces. I was looking at restaurants. I was looking at corporate rental places. And this website came up where you can rent these homes by the hour. And so we will be having a really, really big Christmas party. At the moment, it looks like it's December 20th at 3 o'clock, but I will confirm that as we get closer. So trusting your instincts, as I said, is all about trusting God. Um, as you know, this was the worst year that I've ever had physically. I've had other emotionally difficult years, but this year physically was horribly challenging. And what happened, I was talking to Gail about it before I got here, was I woke up and I felt like I was living in a tomb. So it was horrendously hot, as you all know. And all of my blinds were drawn, all of my blackout curtains were drawn. I literally couldn't see out of anything. And this morning I woke up and I said, nope, it's time. I took down all the blackout curtains. I opened up the windows. I opened up the shades. I let the light come in. And the voice inside me said, it's time to put all that in the past, move forward, go into the sunshine, let the sun shine on you, and go into that. So I opened up all the blinds and all the curtains. I'm not living in a tomb anymore. And that has just changed my perspective totally. So remember that God is always with you and will never leave you. That's a big part of it. As I trust God more and I allow God to be in my life more, I let go more, I allow life to unfold more. There have been lots of breakthroughs. I am enough. I have enough. I have everything I will ever need with God as my best friend. We have lots to cover in this series. There are many areas that we will be going to. We need to let go and let God. We need to learn to listen to God more. I'm going to continue to encourage us to do our practices. Don't ever take for granted this brilliant gift we have been given of God's endless love and the ability to feel his presence more abundantly, learning how to trust the process as we listen more often so we can continue hearing God's voice. And so it is. Remember at all times, the power is in you. It always has been, and it always will be. All righty.